Fiona told RNZ escalating living costs are constantly on her mind.
Sleep-wise, it's affected my sleep quite badly. I suffer from insomnia quite bad because I worry about what I'm going to do for this week.
The support service Family Works says that as prices keep rising, more people are forced to decide between bills and food. You can hear more about this on Checkpoint shortly. The Climate Change Minister says Nationals' support for the country's first 3 emissions budgets cements climate action for years to come. Both major political parties have committed to the budgets, which cap New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions for the next 15 years. James Shaw says it's a milestone for climate change policy.
I do want to give credit where it's due, to the National Party for their speeches, because they did maintain that line that framework is important. It was very important, I think, for New Zealanders to hear that no matter what government there is, that you're going to see those emissions budgets over the course of the next 15 years.
James Shaw says the cross-party support means future governments will keep curbing emissions even if they have different ways of doing so. New Zealand is seeking to resolve a trade dispute with one of its closest allies. It believes Canada has breached the rules of the CPTPP agreement at the expense of New Zealand exporters. Political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
The government believes that recently implemented Canadian dairy tariff quotas are inconsistent with Canada's CPTPP obligations. Trade Minister Damien O'Connor believes it could shut New Zealand dairy exporters out of around $68 million over 2 years. This is the first dispute settlement New Zealand has sought under a free trade agreement and the first by any party under the CPTPP. Canada has 7 days to respond.
The Foreign Minister has reiterated the advisory to New Zealanders not to travel to Ukraine. It's been revealed former Defence Minister Ron Mark is there, helping with humanitarian efforts. Nanaia Mahuta was asked whether she believes he could become a possible target.
Oh, look, I'm not going to discuss specific cases, but we have a travel advisory that has made a clear expression that people should not be travelling to Ukraine. It is a conflict area. Our ability to support will be limited.
Ron Mark is helping a Christian organisation deliver supplies. The Wellington City Council has rejected a bid to oppose the expansion of the capital's airport, which it part owns. A notice of motion put forward by 5 councillors failed after being debated for 2 hours today. Opponents of the proposed expansion say it'll increase greenhouse gas emissions, but Mayor Andy Foster says it's necessary to meet demand because people still have a growing appetite for flying. A passenger in Florida with no flying experience had to take over a single-engine Cessna after the pilot fell ill. He managed to radio a flight controller and got these instructions.
311 Delta, roger. Try to hold the wings level and see if you can start descending for me. Push forward on the controls and descend at a very slow rate.
Which he did. Flight controller Robert Morgan met him after he landed, but his identity remains a mystery, as he said he just wanted to get home to his pregnant wife. There was one other passenger on board. To sport, and a former teammate says Brendan McCullum's transformation of New Zealand cricket will easily translate to the England environment. The former Black Caps skipper is set to be confirmed as England Test coach. Grant Elliott says McCullum brings the right attributes for a struggling England team who have won just one of their last 17 tests. He has no international coaching experience, but Elliott believes the pressure McCullum's under as coach of the Kolkata Knight Riders in the IPL is greater than what he'll face with England.
I think that's probably the most pressure that you would get as a coach around the circuit because you've got privately owned teams. So that there's a lot of pressure on him as a coach in IPL, and I think that pressure can be translated into international cricket. If anything, international cricket fixtures there's probably less pressure on you, I think, as a coach.
New Breakers coach Modi Mayor is distancing himself from his predecessor's style. Under Dan Shamir, the Breakers finished last this season, having also failed to make the playoffs in the 2 previous years.
Me and Dan, although we were great partners, are very different people. I coach the same way that I am. We will see a team that is enthusiastic and happy and competitive and aggressive.
And footballer Lionel Messi was the world's highest paid athlete over the past year, earning $130 million according to the annual Forbes list. Second highest was LeBron James, followed by Cristiano Ronaldo. That's the news.
You care about our nurses?
Another person says, I hope Andrew Little was listening to that item on nurses waiting 10 years for residency. You have thoughts on our immigration policies?
Claire says all work is valued. Our immigration department continues to fail the needs of Aotearoa New Zealand. Elitism and sexism is alive and well.
You have great gardening advice. Grandma in Christchurch says, in all capital letters, grow parsley in a pot.
Always keen to hear your views. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For all of the North Island, except for Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine, but clouds increasing south of Waikato tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay north of Napier, mostly cloudy. Isolated showers are clearing from the south tomorrow. For Hawke's Bay from Napier southwards and for Wairarapa, cloudy at first, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. For Buller and Westland, fine at first, becoming cloudy tonight and a few showers are developing tomorrow. Fiordland is cloudy, a few showers, turning to rain tomorrow night. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, apart from Clutha. Fine apart from a few areas of low cloud inland tomorrow morning. Clutha and Southland, cloudy near the coast with a few showers until late afternoon, partly cloudy elsewhere. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, the odd shower. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Food prices keep escalating and some Aucklanders say they're cutting meals to cope. Stats New Zealand figures released today show groceries were 6.4% pricier this April compared to the same month last year. Fruit and veg rocketed up 9.4% and meat, poultry and fish 8.4%. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe headed to West Auckland to see how some locals are getting by.
We get chatting to Karen outside West City Mall, Waitakere. It's a sunny morning in Henderson, the rays providing a little warmth on a cool autumn morning. But Karen isn't feeling overly bright. Fact is, she's a little nervous to talk about her situation, but decides it's a reality people need to hear.
Well, I only eat once a day, and if I'm low on food, I either ask my mother or my sister.
She's looking for work, but is on a benefit right now, and she says the money barely covers her costs. After rent, water, power, there's hardly enough for fresh fruit and vegetables, and you can forget about a decent bit of meat.
We won't be able to afford to eat soon. And then, people will end up dying from that.
And she's not alone. Lola stops to talk to us before heading into the mall.
I was landscaping, and because of COVID and travel restrictions and all of this, and it got stupid. And the person that people I was working for, they couldn't even maintain themselves, so I was let go.
The loss of work making it so much harder to support not only herself but her son in an era of sky-high prices wherever you look.
Cars out, bus. I'm doing okay because I understand if I don't do okay, we're not going to be okay. But I have called on food services more in the last 3 years than I ever have.
These stories are far from unusual in the country's largest city, though they're a hardy bunch here in Henderson. This is a topic that's tough to broach. It's got to end, doesn't it?
Yeah. Sorry.
Fiona says the cost of living is constantly on her mind.
Sleep-wise, it's affected my sleep quite badly. I suffer from insomnia quite bad because I worry about what I'm going to do for this week. So, yeah.
Family Works Waitemata and Whangarei area manager Alistair Houston hears tales like these daily. He deals with everyone with all sorts of budgets, benefits, parents working 2 jobs, people struggling with rents or mortgages.
There are going to have to be some tough decisions in terms of priorities. Do they continue to pay the bills or eat, or a bit of both? there's real pressures on everything at this moment in time. And if fuel does continue to go up, you can only see things getting worse.
Some clients are effectively trapped in a cycle, unable to pay to keep vehicles roadworthy, being caught and then being unable to travel to work.
For the second time, this person lost their job and then couldn't actually afford the car failed them off, and they couldn't then afford to go and get another job because they couldn't actually drive to it. So we found a source to help remedy that, which allowed them to go and look for a job and actually get a job and then come back to earning some money again.
Hear me unfold the truth no longer hold. Let me show you my pain from the truth that I hold. So above all, most of all, what we seek a new start for a new generation. So maybe the Lord will open doors like shine many blessing.
Back outside West City, we get chatting to McIver, who, looking at the circumstances of friends and family, believes the country's got its priorities all wrong.
There is no one in New Zealand that doesn't pay taxes, right? And my belief is that I believe the government money has been abused. It's been used for different reasons, and for certain reasons we don't need, like stadiums.
Then there's those like Jan, getting older, on the pension, all while still trying to service a mortgage.
I got forced out of work through an accident. So it just makes it even that much harder going from earning $800 a week to getting $300 a week from pension.
Rachel and her husband have 2 boys to support, a task she says seems harder than ever.
It's hard because boys eat a lot. The prices have just gone up. Some of the stuff's just gone up so much, like cheese especially. It was like $10 and it's gone up at least $5, $6. So.
Lola fears more in this community will simply keep turning to alternative ways of simply getting by.
Drugs. Lots of it out here.
Gangs?
Gangs, yep. They'll eat you up. They want you. Start selling the drugs for them. You'll get some money.
Single mums, grandmothers, families, fathers. The struggle on these streets is real, and it doesn't discriminate.
And if you were listening to that piece from our 2 Nicks on radio, the video version will be on our webpage. Ho mai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. How are you managing the household budget at the moment? And your thoughts on food prices, which seems to be going up and up. Text me, Pātui Mai 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A former Gloriavale resident who was used as unpaid child labour says it's time government agencies went into the closed Christian community, opened their eyes and did their job. In a landmark decision this week, the Employment Court has ruled that 3 other former residents of the commune were employees from age 6, doing strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous work. Work that included 3 a.m. starts and 12-hour plus shifts that couldn't be explained away as childhood chores or voluntary work, all unpaid, with some children allegedly physically abused or denied food for not working hard or fast enough. So-called Gloriavale leavers feel let down by government agencies, including the Labour Inspectorate, who twice found that community residents were volunteers. Aaron Courage, who left Gloriavale 10 years ago, says he was viciously beaten for not working fast enough, and he's worried for several siblings aged between 5 and 17 still living there.
When I turned 9, that's when we started getting up in the morning to do the morning milkings. And then most afternoons, bar sort of 1 or 2 in the week, we were designated to go and work in various areas within the community. So, for instance, like we might have spent an afternoon out on the farm doing weeds or milking, teat spraying. We might have been in the moss shed, cleaning the sticks out of the sphagnum moss, or down in the swamp itself and physically pulling it out and putting it on the racks and cleaning it and spreading it out. And yeah, just all sorts, like filling in potholes on the driveway. Like you'd often have like groups of 10, 15 or 20 boys all crowded around a trailer, shoveling off loads of dirt and filling in potholes, and sweeping up concrete sites, building sites.
Aaron, sounds like some pretty heavy-duty work for young children.
Oh, there definitely was. I don't have a problem with blisters per se, but all the time you'd end up with blisters all over your hand and sore feet from walking in the gumboots and all that sort of thing.
What concerns do you still have, Aaron, about the people who live there and in particular the children?
Well, my biggest concern is the fact that they don't have access to an objective truth. The truth that they're subjected to is the truth of Gloriavale, and that's their whole worldview. They don't actually have perspective on life itself because they don't know what life is. Their life is Gloriavale, and you can't make a structured decision without having all the options in front of you. So that's definitely my biggest concern, that there's only one option for them, and that option is forced down their throat.
When you say it's forced down their throat, in terms of work and things, were you punished if you didn't meet their expectations, didn't work hard enough or fast enough?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They'll deny it black and blue because that's what they do. But, it was quite common. And one place in particular was worse than the others, and that was working at the sphagnum moss swamp with a certain guy. And he would beat you, and it's not just like a slap upside the back, it's like just rip into you, kick you till you're on the ground, and then just keep going and slapping and whacking and yelling verbal abuse, and it was just really nasty. And there was I remember times it was like in the winter and it's frosted over by 4 in the afternoon, freezing cold in the swamp there, and your hands are wet and you're icy cold, and you almost physically can't flex your fingers because they're that cold, but you weren't allowed to stop to warm them up at all. You just had to keep going, and that was the kind of thing that was required. And this is not like paid labour. This is forced labour that you would get as a 9, 10-year-old or even 8 or 7 years old.
How did you know that it wasn't right? Because as you've mentioned, you don't know if you can't see a comparison, right? If Gloriavale is your whole world, you don't know how other children are treated. So how did you know this isn't right?
Well, for me, I didn't know that until after I had left. And when someone decides that they're going to leave, talking from my own experience, when someone decides that they're going to leave, they're taking a massive step into darkness, and it's like you've just got no idea what to expect once you take that step and you leave. But then it's slowly a gradual it's learning a whole new culture, and that's where you learn these things. You go, oh, hang on, it wasn't actually normal what was going on. It's normal in there.
What do you want agencies to do now?
Well, I'd just like them to do their jobs for a start. They don't have to do anything special. They just need to go in there and take an honest look at what is going on and not turn a blind eye. You don't have to probe very far to find out what's going on. So they're either doing nothing at all or they're just turning a blind eye to what they're seeing. So what I want them to do is actually go in there and deal with the problem at hand, and not just take this garbage that the leaders are looking for meaningful change. If they were looking for meaningful change, it would have happened long ago.
Aaron, when you were at Gloriavale, do you remember any agencies visiting?
The only one I remember coming was the ERO doing the school inspections every 3 years. That's the only recollection of an agency that I have, but that's pretty standard. So,
Aaron, were you working during school hours as a child?
Define school hours. If school hours is 9 a.m. to 1 p.m, then most of the time, no. If we're talking school hours as in normal New Zealand society school, sort of whatever it is, 9 till 3 p.m, then absolutely, because once the clock hits 1, you're out the door and you're out at work. And saying that, I recall quite often that, especially in high school, you'd be called out to help on the building site during school hours, and that was kind of just part of what was expected, that you'd be able to hop up and walk out if someone walked in and said, we need a hand here, we're doing such and such something like that. It would happen regularly enough that I can remember it.
Aaron, now that there is this employment court ruling that some of the people who were at Gloriavale were in fact employees but weren't paid and were doing some dangerous and strenuous work, do you think you should be paid for the work that you did?
Should anyone be paid for the work they do? Yes. Do I want to be paid? Yes. I mean, I did the work, so yeah, I want to be paid. So absolutely yes, and I think everyone that has been in that situation in Gloriavale should be paid out. That's only a fair thing to ask.
When you left, what did you get? What did you take with you?
I mean, I had the clothes on my back. I was barely 15 when I left, so it was unique in that I didn't just go out and start work straight away and care for myself. I moved over to Australia and I lived with extended family for about 18 months.
So, Aaron, when you left Gloriavale, you didn't have a bank account, there was no money, there weren't wages that you were given or earnings that you were given before you left, nothing?
You have to ask firm and steadfast. If there was, I never saw a dime. I never knew about any bank account. I never knew about any money. As far as I was aware, there was no such thing as money going into anyone's bank accounts for the work they did.
And that's Aaron Courage, a former Gloriavale resident. And Checkpoint has contacted Fervent Steadfast to respond, but we are yet to hear back. It is 22 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Education Minister has been called out for allegedly inferring international students have dishonestly exploited a backdoor to residency under study to work rights. In a press release about the government's immigration reset, Chris Hipkins said, "The future will be different. We won't be going back to National's volume over value approach that became a backdoor to residency for lower skilled and lower paid migrant workers." The International Students Association says the comments suggest overseas students have misused residency pathways that have been legally available to them, and it fuels anti-migrant attitudes. Joining us now is the association's national president, Vikram Selvaraj. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Can you tell me exactly what offended you about Chris Hipkins' comments?
I think it's the blanket statement, saying that there was a backdoor residency when migrants and international students just used a pathway that were offered to them. There was nothing illegal. There was nothing. They did it secretly to statement saying backdoor to residency.
So what are the consequences of his comments, do you think?
I think it just makes it really hard for the community to understand where we come from and what are the struggles that we have to get a residency. And now when people are going to see us, for instance, even for myself, when I get a residency in the future, hopefully, people will be like, "Oh, are you the one of the backdoor residency group?" They don't see our hard work, our sweat, and the effort to contribute to the community. But people, just by that statement, they are dividing us and making us feel we did something illegal, did something wrong, which never happened.
While his language might be emotionally charged, is he right that some students have gained residency, arguably with qualifications, low-level qualifications that New Zealand does not need? For example, business management courses.
I think it's not fair to generalize the statement, because if the immigration, New Zealand offers them a pathway to get a residency, or they are given an opportunity to succeed or grow in their field, and if they see that particular course is going to enhance them, and that enhancement is going to give them residency, I don't see it as a backdoor.
Are all international students coming here to get a specific qualification, or are they coming here to get residency? What's their top priority for some?
I think most of them are here for the education. We are here for the education, and then we will see how our future holds and whether we are able to connect, whether we are able to contribute. Even for myself, when I came to New Zealand, I only saw what I can learn and how much I can learn from New Zealand culture, the education system, and then I will evaluate at the end of my journey whether I can contribute. And that's when we will be able to know whether we want to take up the residency in the future.
Do you think there have been some students who have rorted the system?
I wouldn't say so. Like I said, it's something that is very generalized because students come with a good intention to create a future for them. So I will never say that they misused it.
So, as you point out, these were study to work rights that people exercised. So what role do you think the government has played in selling the residency dream to international students?
And I mean, when it comes to residency, it's always been hard to get it in the first place. Like, even though I'm studying Bachelor of Criminal Justice, I have no pathway or a clear route for me to say that after finishing my criminal justice, I will be getting a residency. In fact, you have a lot of added layers of obstacles that you need to overcome to get a proper job. So getting a job is not easy in New Zealand, even for New Zealanders. So for international students, it's even more harder.
How much does your course cost you, or how much has it cost you this far, Vikram?
So I have paid for $140,000.
Say that again?
$140,000.
And is it your hope that you will become a resident here?
When I started my education, no. But now, if I look at the community, the people that I've been working with, I want to start a family here. I see my future here. So yes, at the end of the day, I want to see having a future here, which is leading to residency.
Are the new rules going to be harder for students, do you think?
Oh, definitely. Way harder than expected. Way harder than how it used to be. So, like I said, it's going to be very, very hard, even for myself. Even though I'm studying Bachelor of Criminal Justice, which is considered high value, it's going to be way harder to get a job.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's Vikram Selvaraj there from the Association of International Students. We've just received a statement from, DGL. Now, this is the company. The CEO, Simon Henry, has made some comments about Nadia Lim. You may remember them. He called her Eurasian fluff, I think were his words. The board has put out a statement to the market saying that Mr Henry has apologised to Ms Lim, the board, DGL employees and by extension all stakeholders for his remarks, and the board acknowledges his genuine regret. The board is determined to ensure respect for diversity and inclusion is embedded firmly throughout DGL's group culture at all levels, and that the company's adherence to ESG principles aligns with market expectations. To that end, the board has commenced a process leading to the appointment of a suitable advisory firm to conduct a thorough independent review of DGL's culture and recommend any changes necessary to ensure the culture reflects key values. And apparently, as part of that, the remuneration framework for senior executives is also being reviewed. So DGL has launched a review appointing someone to do an independent look at their culture and recommend any changes after the CEO, Simon Henry, made those comments about Nadia Lim. Former Black Caps captain Brendan McCullum is set to take on the head coaching role of the England men's test side. The 40-year-old has agreed to take up the job, subject to a contract being finalised. McCullum played his last test for New Zealand in February 2016 and is the coach of the Indian Premier League side, Kolkata Knight Riders. Now, to discuss all of this, we're joined by sports editor Stephen Hewson. Stephen, so is it a risky move for him?
For him or for England cricket, Lisa, I think that it's most probably a riskier move for England cricket, but at the same token, a very bold move by them, and it possibly just shows where they're at. I mean, they've won one of 17, or in one of their last 17 test matches, so something really needs to change. And they're looking for someone in McCullum. What he's going to bring is not necessarily the technical side of things, but they're looking for someone who can create a sense of self-belief in that England team. Interesting too, you've now got two Kiwis at the helm because Ben Stokes, who was born and raised in Christchurch, is the England captain, or just taken over the England captaincy. And so now you've got Brendan McCullum. I suppose it was a left field choice in a sense, because the smart money previously was on former South African and former Indian coach Gary Kirsten, who's got a real track record. I mean, as we mentioned, McCullum's only got the IPL behind him, no international coaching experience, but the England Cricket Authorities obviously feel that they've got to do something and do it quick, smart, and go down a very different road to what they have previously.
So what are the fans in England and New Zealand going to think of this?
Well, the English fans have embraced it. I mean, they realise, I think, that something desperately needed to be done to change that sort of one win from 17, and I suppose the humbling they got in the Ashes series as well earlier this year. England's had international or non-English coaches before. They've had Duncan Fletcher and Andy Flower from Zimbabwe and Trevor Bayliss from Australia, so it's not as though having an overseas former player or overseas coach is something new for them. And I think New Zealand cricket, in a way, is a winner from this, because what it means is presumably further down the track you might see Brendan McCullum in the Black Caps role, but he's cut his teeth with England. He's going to come to New Zealand possibly, or back home, with international experience. How long? I don't know. This lasts with the England role. I mean, generally 3-4 years seems to be about the life expectancy of a job with England cricket as the head coach. But it means he's going to have international experience, and presumably down the track it's going to look like great for New Zealand cricket, because ultimately he's going to be Black Caps coach at some point. So Brendan McCullum's to-do list, what's going to be the first thing on it? Building self-confidence. I mean, and yeah, I mean that's ultimately it. Joe Root's gone as captain, Ben Stokes has taken over, and the approach that Ben Stokes to playing cricket is very much in your face. He's a competitor. Brendan McCullum's going to come in having to do the same, I suppose, rescue job that he did with New Zealand cricket in about 2012 when New Zealand cricket was very much a low. Between himself as skipper and Mike Heston as coach, they resurrected New Zealand cricket and essentially laid that platform that we saw when Kane Williamson took the side to the Test Championship a year or so back. So that is, he's been in this position before, resuscitating a side, and he knows what he's dealing with, and that's what's going to be at the top of the list, essentially building self-confidence in a team that is slumped about 6th in the world rankings. Thanks, Stephen. Ka kite. That's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson. Kia ora e te iwi e Hariaki nei e a checkpoint. Locking up young ram raiders isn't going to help, according to some child welfare experts. The Education Minister calls for higher quality courses and more diversity in the foreign student market. And the plane passenger forced to land a Cessna with zero flying experience. And of course, Nona Peltier will join us. Homai o whakaro. Let us know what you think about anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email. We do love to get a good old-fashioned email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Food prices are still rising, but not so quickly. Annual food inflation in the year to April eased to 6.4% after prices barely rose in the month. The annual rate is compared to 7.6% in the year ended March. New Zealand is launching a dispute settlement with Canada, claiming it's breaching the rules of the CPTPP. Canada has implemented dairy tariff rate quotas, which specify the quantities of products that can cross its border tariff-free. The Climate Change Minister says Nationals' support for the country's first 3 emissions budgets cements climate action for years to come. Both major political parties have committed to the budgets, which cap New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions for the next 15 years. James Shaw says it's a milestone for climate change policy. A former Gloriavale resident who was used as unpaid child labour says it's time government agencies went in and did their job. The Employment Court this week ruled 3 other former residents of the Christian sect were employees from age 6, doing difficult and sometimes dangerous work. But the Labour Inspectorate had earlier twice found that community residents were volunteers. Aaron Courage, who left Gloriavale 10 years ago, says he was viciously beaten for not working fast enough. He told Checkpoint that he fears for those still within the community because they are only exposed to one world view. A potential stumbling block for the government's Three Waters reform has been cleared. The global credit rating agency Standard & Poor's has rated it favourably, saying it's confident the new entities will be able to take on debt without burdening councils. The positive response means the Three Waters legislation can now be introduced to Parliament. And North Korea's announced its first COVID outbreak and strict lockdowns. Pyongyang has not revealed how many cases, however. The vast majority of the population is thought to be unvaccinated. Those are the headlines. We'll have a news bulletin for you at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, and it is, of course, time for the business news. Ko taku hoa in Naianei, ko Nona Peltier, who's live in the studio. Nona, let's start with the housing market, because, man, everyone loves a good housing story. Continuing to cool. What are the latest numbers?
Yeah, they are definitely starting to cool. We've been talking about that for a while. So the Real Estate Institute has an index which measures the changing value of property over time, and it says that it still rose 6.3%, but that compares with an increase of 9% in March. So April, definitely, it's a slowing growth. It's still growing.
And that's an average across the market,
That's across everything, yeah.
Okay.
But, it's taking longer to sell houses, and there's more houses available on the market. Some people are saying, look, it's a buyer's market. Others are saying it's a balanced market, one where if you have financing in place, it might be a good time to buy a house because there's a lot on the market, and perhaps you can negotiate a good deal. It doesn't mean that just because there's that many properties on the market and the interest rates are rising, that vendors are going to suddenly just drop their prices, because there is still a housing shortage. And you have to kind of look at the market as a whole. So, yes, prices are not climbing as much as they were. In fact, there was a month-on-month fall from March to April of 1.7%. But over the year earlier, it's still a 10% increase. So I wouldn't say...
Which isn't small fry when you're talking about $1 million plus.
Exactly.
For a house in Auckland.
And then some of the rationale there is if you buy now and you have the finance in place, you can lock in a cheaper interest rate. Whereas we know interest rates are on the rise. That's almost for certain.
Okay, one of the country's leading cryptocurrency trading platforms has halted operation. Is this an Nona, or what is it?
Well, there you go. With the Bitcoin, it's the Bitcoin story. Bitcoin, it's very much like a commodity. It's not a currency. It's a token. It's listed on the international
markets. You make it sound like something you put in the fizzy drink dispenser. Anyway,
it's a digital token. Digital token. Right. Look. Bitcoin has lost about 27% of its value in about a week. So the U.S. value is it's almost $30,000 for a Bitcoin, and that's $11,000 less than it was last week.
And what is driving that?
Not a lot of buyers. But you know what? Today, the only thing that we know for certain in these volatile times is that U.S. interest rates are sure to rise. Same with the New Zealand interest rates. And that certainty is changing the markets. People are a little bit worried about that volatility, so we're seeing that right through the markets. This company called BitPrime, they had to halt their operations today because they were trying to raise some money. It's a growth company. They were trying to raise money to keep going, and in good times, that would be a good idea. They've been in business for a few years. They've got 30 staff. They operate across a number of countries. Their turnover is $100 million. Sounds like a good business, but they can't raise any money to keep going because it's a growth company. Need cash flow. Don't have it. So they've had to halt their trading, and that's partly because the market's nervous about this type of investment. Bitcoin is down. Who knows if people still want to carry on in the market? Liquidity is an issue because a lot of people have backed away. So that's all come to rest on this poor company just as they're trying to raise some money. Not a good signal for them, and so that they're struggling. Doesn't mean that they're going to continue to struggle. Maybe they'll find an investor that comes in with some cash to help them out.
Okay, speaking of the markets, Nona, on your marks, get set.
Ooh, well, I don't want to say it, but let's talk about the currency since we're on that subject. We dropped again to 62.5 US cents. But we're steady against the Australian at 90.6 and 51.2 pence.
51.2. Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty much where we've been, but the US dollar is just a steady drop. But it's not just us. It's all sorts of currencies are having the same trouble. The index, of course, because of all this volatility and concern about interest rates, the top 50 index, it fell nearly 0.5% today. That was a 56-point drop to 11,233.
Thanks, Nona. Catch you again soon. Nona Peltier with Business News there. A well-known Hamilton theatre is staging one of its most dramatic shows yet, a fight for survival that's drawn in millionaires, divided the community and has local councillors at each other's throats. The council voted to demo the 60-year-old Founders Theatre and replace it with a park and a performance area, rejecting a proposal from the charitable trust Theatre of the Impossible to repurpose the building into a community hub. Now, the theatre's been closed since 2016 because it's an earthquake-prone building, and restoration could cost up to $20 million, according to the council. With the curtain call nearing today, 3 philanthropists, including the Mowbray family with their billion-dollar toy empire, entered the picture. Head of the group fighting to save Founders and former Mayor Margaret Evans was at today's council meeting and joins us now. Margaret, it seems like the bulldozers are coming. What is your reaction to that?
Well, we've already had people willing to lie down in front of them. We are going to try and have a bit of a get-together in the next few
Margaret,
days.
you're on a bit of a dicky cell phone. Sorry to interrupt you, but you're kind of flicking in and out there. So can I get you to just have a bit of a womble round and see if you can find a spot that we can hear you properly from?
Is that better? I'll stand near the Wi-Fi centre.
Fantastic. So, we were talking about bulldozers to start off with. Do you actually think it would come to people lying in front of them, if that's what it takes?
Well, the passions are pretty high, but obviously we think it's time for more conversations. Until the bulldozers come, we've still got time. And there's a great willingness to have another recap. Let's see what else we can do. What can I say? We still think it's worthwhile fighting for this.
Why? Why is this building worth saving?
It's not just a building, it's a whole range of things. Firstly, there's absolutely no doubts, everybody agrees, there's a real shortage of space for community groups. And the irony is this is exactly what the councillors were discussing today, because they've just had to close down what's called the Celebrating Age Centre, which is a centre where lots of different groups like Senior Net and Age Concern and those sorts of gather, because it hasn't been properly maintained. We've been told anything up to 30 or 40 different groups now are looking for another place to be to have their activities. We've had discussions, and this has been passed on to the council, from Community Waikato, Creative Waikato, the Waikato Society of Arts, numerous artists, the men's shed, people who like to work with wood, artists, and they are all looking for a place to operate. And our view is that we could get the Founders Theatre repurposed very quickly. We have shown the council, and I think today finally there was an agreement that our figures backed up between 7 and 10 million to open the doors, earthquake proofing. That's done by professional quantity surveyors. And we're saying while the council gets other premises sorted out, let's do this now.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Even on those figures that you've outlined there, that's a lot of coin, right? And today, 3 big players were named, the Mowbrays, the Gallaghers and the Ratcliffe families. So why has it taken so long for them to come forward, and are they prepared to put up the bucks?
You would have to ask them. I'm very confident the fact that they were prepared to go public shows that they will support this project. I might say yesterday afternoon, Robin Ratcliffe, who's another well-known Hamiltonian, offered to buy the theatre from the council staff. So I think that was a very good sign that they would put their money where their mouth is.
Wasn't one of the questions the council raised is that there's been no business plan, and did they not ask you for a business plan and there still isn't one?
No, we did give them a business plan, and in fact we used Treasury's own model business plan and the council's model business plan, and they weren't satisfied with that because firstly they suspected our $7 to $10 million, which we think we finally overcame. They suspected that our operating costs model, which we think none of the councillors actually read, and we weren't questioned on that. However, what we're saying is the building could run with 1 and a bit staff members, which it did for 40 years. A report that was done for council some time ago on theatres criticised the council for its excessive and growing expenditure on theatres. And they said, we're a community group. We understand the way communities operate, and that's a lot different from professionals and consultants. There's public good in this. Obviously, this can run much, much more cheaply than if the council operates it.
You're kind of between a rock and a hard place now, though, aren't you? They've voted to bowl it. So where does that leave you? I mean, how can you possibly turn it round?
Well, councillors can always do a new vote.
And how optimistic are you, though, Margaret?
Concrete.
How
Until
optimistic?
they bring the bulldozers in, there is a chance we can get them to change their minds.
Isn't the time frame to do that within a month or a roundabout?
Well, that's a very interesting thing, and it's actually a legal question, and I don't want to bore everybody, but under the local government legislation and the council's long-term plan, anything that changes year by year, if it's significant, they've got to go out to public consultation. Well, at the moment, the $1 million that the council has budgeted to demolish this building is for the financial year beginning the 1st of July next year. So that's more than 12 months, that's 18 months out. And so what we're saying is that a legal challenge? Can they actually come out and spend that $1 million when they don't have it in the budget?
Thanks for joining us, Margaret. That's Margaret Evans, who is fighting to save the Founders Theatre there in Hamilton. And she is basically not over until the bulldozers come in. Both of New Zealand's major political parties have committed to the country's first 3 emissions budgets. A special parliamentary debate on the budgets, which cap New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions for the next 15 years, was held today. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
The emissions budgets have been billed as the final piece of the framework needed to embed enduring climate action in Aotearoa. Climate Change Minister James Shaw says the crisis is on New Zealand's doorstep.
We've had multiple floods in Tairāwhiti and Gisborne. We've had severe storm damage, again repeatedly in Westport and Bulla. We've had droughts in Southland so acute that the Awaroa-Waituna wetlands caught fire.
Mr Shaw argues the politicisation of climate policy has stalled progress. He says the emissions budgets will ensure meaningful action.
It is a generational challenge. It requires a level of consistency across governments and across decades. And the critical thing about this framework is that the imperative is set and the direction of travel is clear.
The National Party is on board, meaning both major political parties are committed to the emissions budgets. Its deputy leader, Nicola Willis, says targets are clearly needed, but National may have different ideas on how to meet them.
While we agree with the goal, we will not always agree on the path. We have choices about how we reduce our emissions, and some choices will be better than others. We want to do what works and what works best for the climate.
James Shaw says it's a significant milestone for climate change policy in New Zealand, building on the cross-party support seen at the passing of the Zero Carbon Act.
I do want to give credit where it's due, to the National Party for their speeches, because they did maintain that line that framework is important. It was very important, I think, for New Zealanders to hear that no matter what government there is, that you're going to see those emissions budgets over the course of the next 15 years.
While both major parties are on board, both ACT and Te Pāti Māori aren't. ACT's climate change spokesperson Simon Court says the budgets are a waste of time.
These budgets are nothing more than a fashion parade of green policy, which will cost New Zealand families and businesses billions. But they won't do anything to reduce emissions any faster than the emissions trading scheme already allows us to do.
Te Pāti Māori opposes the budgets for the opposite reason, arguing they don't go far enough. Co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer wants to see more urgent, transformative action.
Te Pāti Māori does not support the proposed emission budgets. It's disappointingly weak, as we believe that they should be tighter and more ambitious. In particular, it is crucial that the budgets are updated to reflect the more urgent action that is needed on methane emissions.
The emissions reduction plan, which will set out how the government will meet the emissions budgets, comes out on Monday.
Well, some of your feedback now on the cost of living and the story earlier in the program about some Aucklanders cutting meals out because they simply can't afford to have 3 meals a day. This listener says, my rent consumes about 90% of my wage. The only reason we can get by is a family tax credit, but only barely. If living costs increase much more, we're going to be faced with some hard decisions. Tricia in Auckland says, food prices, I don't understand why as a major dairy producer we have to pay so much for our dairy. It's a rip-off. It's not the same in the UK. And this one, it is extraordinarily difficult to afford nutritious food. Rescue Food and food banks have never been busier, but we need to grow more food and have free school lunches. Food security is incredibly important for us and we are all in it together. Food banks are simply a plaster until rents are frozen and benefits increase. And finally this one, a few weeks ago, New World St Martin's Christchurch was charging $3.95 for half a cabbage. The not-so-humble cabbage at $4 for a half. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on the text. A group of Wellington City councillors have failed in their bid for the council to oppose expansion plans for the capital's airport. Some councillors say building a larger airport is not appropriate in a climate emergency, but others say it's necessary. Our Wellington Issues reporter Kirsty Frame has the story.
Wellington Airport says it's expecting passenger numbers to double by 2040. It wants to expand, absorbing part of the neighbouring golf course so it can take more planes. After appointing an external panel on the matter, a delegated decision-maker of the council approved the development. But Councillor Iona Pannett asked the council to publicly oppose the project. Her motion says unless the airport and airlines reduce carbon emissions and noise for the neighbouring suburbs, it should not expand.
What I'm asking you to do today is to make a political call in line with the climate emergency which most of you have agreed to. What we are doing today is sending a strong and clear signal that climate change is an urgent issue and we must take action.
The notice was backed by Deputy Mayor Sarah Free and councillors Terry O'Neill, Laurie Foon and Tamitha Paul. For more than 2 hours, councillors asked questions of the legal team and officers, trying to make sense of the ramifications of passing the motion. The council owns a third of the airport, which is currently being taken to the Environment Court on the expansion plans by lobby groups who oppose it. Councillors argued that the notice of motion is the only way councillors can make a public stance. Councillor Tamitha Paul says she was not afraid of the legal risks presented to the council.
92% of Wellingtonians said that they wanted action on climate change, so that's pretty straightforward. I think this is a pretty obvious thing that we can do is prevent an airport from expanding. So there has been a consultation process and I'm not afraid for that to be interrogated by the courts.
Councillor Pannett agreed, but the notice ultimately failed 5-7. Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons says the motion would be misleading the public if it passed because the council can't stop the expansion.
Those who signed this notice of motion also agreed to the delegations. We gave away this power already, so I don't think it's responsible to try and get it back. At the end of the day, we really mislead residents if we pass this. It's the sort of thing that undermines trust in public institutions.
Mayor Andy Foster told councillors that if they wanted the airport to stop its expansion, people will have to stop flying.
The airport's only going to invest logically if that growth continues. So it'll be a response to what? To the choices that people make. Somebody said something about 92% of people want action on climate change. Agreed. But what are people doing in terms of their behaviour to give effect to that?
Guardian of the Bays, Benoit Pett, says the decision today is incredibly disappointing.
We had the opportunity to make a clear statement in favour of the climate and could call instead in procedural and processes debates, which in this particular case were not really.
But the group, made up of residents around the airport, are still proceeding with their legal bid to stop the expansion. The Guardians of the Bay, an international and climate safe travel institute, will have a hearing against the airport in November.
It is 7 minutes to 6. Queenstown locals are putting up their hands and picking up dishcloths to help worker-starved businesses brace for a busy winter. Over the Easter and Anzac long weekends, many Queenstown hotels and restaurants capped reservations because they didn't have enough staff and wanted to avoid burning out the workers they do have. A Locals Keeping Queenstown Open initiative hopes to ease the pressure by bringing in people with some spare hours. Tess Brunton has more.
When Mel Hara first saw the call for Queenstown locals to pitch in on Facebook last Friday, she was thousands of kilometres away, waiting at Heathrow Airport for her flight home. She's the founder of Connect and Care and was looking for some temporary work before business picked up.
Yeah, I just thought, well, I'll put my hand forward to work some shifts or hours that suit me as a single parent in between school and, just whatever's available and what I can do, then I can help the businesses hopefully and vice versa.
With her jet lag easing, she's hoping to help out her community.
For businesses that are struggling so much in our community, I've seen it. I see it all the time. Burnout is, it's a real thing down here. And I think if anything that we can do to prevent further burnout and reduce stress is a good thing.
With a background in tourism management and a few hospitality and service jobs under her belt, she doesn't mind what work she does.
I'm not too proud to clean toilets or do some housekeeping. I think it's just whatever is available. I'm quite happy to do a variety of different jobs. Help in the kitchen, whether that's doing dishes or prepping food or front of house.
Future Hospitality Group operates several businesses in the resort town. Its co-director Bert Haynes says staff are very thin on the ground. They've adapted their opening hours and days to ensure they could cope.
We've been fortunate enough to tap on the shoulders of some of our former employees that have worked for us, and they've come in and done, say, like cameo shifts, if you would, just to help us get through some of the weekends that have gone. And we've sort of got that lined up even a bit here through May and into June as we're trying to staff up for the winter.
He says the initiative is already making a difference.
It's been a great initiative, and it's been awesome to see uptake in it. And I've spoken with other operators that have actually lent into it. And no surprise that a few of the faces that have jumped out, other small business owners that have jumped in to help, and musos, and just fantastic local people that have answered that call. It's been quite awesome to see, yeah.
They've got 32 staff in total, but Mr. Haynes says they need nearly double that for winter so they can open each business back up to 7 days. A few former staff are returning for the winter, but he isn't ruling out seeking a helping hand from locals.
If we do get to that stage where, it's the difference of being able to open a venue for the night, 100% I'd jump on and use that initiative.
The Locals Keeping Queenstown Open Facebook page was launched earlier this month. Page co-founder and ex-Travel co-owner Tori Keating says they've had a huge uptake in messages already.
It's not creating new jobs or new employment, it's just creating a bridge really to sort of get us through the winter season while we're still waiting for people to come back into town.
With eager skiers and snowboarders expected to arrive in their droves, Queenstown businesses are hopeful more workers aren't far away.
He kōrero nā hau tēnei. This next story is an interesting one, or a terrifying one. To the US now, where a passenger with no flying experience has landed a Cessna in Florida after the pilot suffered a medical emergency. He pulled off the feat thanks to the expert help of an air traffic controller who guided him through the process. Tara Jakeway reports.
Meet Robert Morgan, a Jupiter resident, dad of 3, and now a certified hero.
I just feel like it was probably meant to happen.
It was around 12:30 Tuesday when Robert, an air traffic controller at PBIA, was outside the tower reading a book on a break.
There's a passenger flying a plane that's not a pilot, and the pilot's incapacitated. So they said we need to try to help them land the plane.
He was the man for the job. In addition to his 20 years in tower control, he is also a flight instructor with around 1,200 hours under his belt.
I knew the plane's flying like any other plane. I just had to keep him calm, point him to the runway, and just tell him how to reduce the power so he could descend to land.
He had never flown the specific model, a Cessna Grand Caravan, so he used this picture of the cockpit to understand the specifics the novice was working with.
I said, all right, we're going to get you to a runway. What do you see now? And he was just passing the shoreline near Boca.
This is an actual video of the flight path of the plane after he took over at 5,000 feet.
Before I knew it, he's like, I'm on the ground. How do I turn this thing off?
Together, Morgan and the passenger had pulled off the impossible. They met on the tarmac and hugged it out.
It felt really good to help somebody, and he told me that he was going to go home tonight to see his pregnant wife.
Tauke, that is absolutely awesome, guiding someone down using a sort of a website print-off of the control panel. Ugh. Stops my heart. On Gloriavale and our interview with Aaron Courage, this listener says, courage, aptly named. Someone else says, how can a religious cult like Gloriavale be allowed to keep children away from normal national education? It is a breach of basic human rights. And on the issue of international students, this person says, on a trip to India a couple of years ago, I was astonished to see hundreds of billboards advertising study in New Zealand to gain residency in a number of big cities. And they question whether the study pass were legitimate.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. A former Gloriavale resident says government agencies need to go into the place and do their jobs properly. Aaron Courage says he was used as unpaid child labour and viciously beaten for not working fast enough. He told Checkpoint agencies shouldn't have to probe very far to find out what's going on.
They're either doing nothing at all or they're just turning a blind eye to what they're seeing. So what I want them to do is actually go in there and deal with the problem at hand and not just take this garbage that the leaders are looking for meaningful change. If they were looking for meaningful change, it would have happened long ago.
Earlier this week, the Employment Court ruled 3 other former Gloriavale residents worked as employees, not volunteers, and were entitled to pay and employment rights. Some Aucklanders say they're skipping meals to cope with the skyrocketing cost of groceries. Stats New Zealand's latest figures show food prices dropped slightly last month compared with March, but are still 6% more than they were a year ago. Fruit and vegetable prices jumped by more than 9%. The support service Family Works says as prices keep rising, more people are forced to decide between bills and food. Food prices make up nearly a fifth of the Consumer Price Index. A Nelson man has been arrested over the fire started on the final day of the occupation of Parliament grounds. The police say the 29-year-old has been charged with intentional damage and doing a dangerous act with intent. He'll appear in the Nelson District Court tomorrow, along with a 29-year-old woman charged with rioting and doing a dangerous act with intent. A 50-year-old man appeared in court today on the same charges, plus assaults with a weapon. Further arrests are expected. The Education Minister says the international student industry must rebuild better than it was before the pandemic. Chris Hipkins told an international education conference today the government wants more diversity in the nations students come from. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
With fewer than 12,000 students left in the country, the formerly $5 billion a year sector has an opportunity to transform itself. The government's already announced tougher work and residency rules, and tomorrow it will unveil its strategy for the sector. Chris Hipkins says it will emphasise high-quality courses as the main drawcard for foreign students. He says the pandemic has shown the importance of a sustainable international education sector.
Child welfare experts say locking up young offenders won't stop a spate of ram raids. In the latest smash and grab, an Onehunga dairy was hit by a stolen vehicle this morning. Child protection lecturer Ian Hislop says it's often a form of escapism.
Peer group adventure thing that kids get involved with. They get carried away, it's Saturday night, pinch your car and egging each other on to drive into a shop front.
Ian Hislop says behavioural change requires good role models, long-term relationships and access to shelter, food and clothing, not youth detention. On Monday, Cabinet will consider funding security measures like bollards. The North Korean government has announced the country's first COVID outbreak, officially anyway, and imposed strict lockdowns. It has not said how many cases there are. The BBC's Jean McKenzie reports from Seoul.
The first case of the highly transmissible Omicron variant was detected in the capital, Pyongyang, 4 days ago. North Korea sealed its borders to travel and trade at the beginning of 2020 and has claimed until now to have kept the virus out. No one in the country is known to have been vaccinated. The regime has rejected multiple offers of vaccines. And this, along with a poor healthcare system and a limited capacity to test, makes people in North Korea incredibly vulnerable.
Hundreds of Auckland bus trips are having to be cancelled because of COVID-19. More than 1,400 have been cancelled today alone, or 10% of total services. Auckland Transport's Metro Optimisation Manager, Richard Harrison, says he understands it's frustrating for commuters.
Cancellations are going to happen. I'm sorry that it's happening. I don't like having to deal with it, but we are dealing with a surge in COVID. My advice to people is be prepared. Expect that cancellations may have to happen, and you can check before you ride.
Scheduled winter maintenance is also a factor in some cancellations. And work began today on removing the stench of rotting material at the Christchurch wastewater treatment plant. Nearby residents have suffered from the smell for months and some have reported health problems. Council spokesperson Nigel Grant says more focus is being put on air quality in the area.
Already offline, I've been talking to Medical Officer of Health from Community and Public Health and getting a good line of communication going. They're obviously interested in us providing them the results from the air sampling that we're getting.
The council's aim is to have the rotting material removed from the plant's filter by early September. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, bringing biodiversity into the home. Released into your neighbourhood with Canterbury University's Emily Arthur. Our overseas correspondent, Peggy Revell, is on the line from Medicine Hat, Canada, where spring is in the air. Well, our forestry correspondent, Dean Bagent-Mercer, has been thinking about bridging the gap between Māori and the Crown over trees growing on iwi land. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For all of the North Island except for Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine, but cloud is increasing south of Waikato tomorrow evening. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay north of Napier, mostly cloudy. Isolated showers are clearing from the south tomorrow. For Hawke's Bay from Napier southwards and for Wairarapa, cloudy at first, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, fine at first, becoming cloudy tonight and a few showers are developing tomorrow. Cloudy in Fiordland, a few showers turning to rain tomorrow night. Fine in Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, apart from Clutha, although there are a few areas of low cloud inland tomorrow morning. For Clutha and Southland, cloudy near the coast with a few showers until late afternoon, partly cloudy elsewhere. And for the Chatham Islands, Re Kohu, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Education Minister says it's time to rebuild the devastated foreign student industry, but it needs to diversify too. Chris Hipkins told an international education conference he wants to see higher quality courses and more diversity in the nations that students are coming from. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
With fewer than 12,000 students left in the country, what was once a $5 billion a year international education sector is now a shadow of its former self. Today, Chris Hipkins told education providers it's time to rebuild, but not like it used to be.
We don't just want to build back the way that we were. We want a sector that delivers higher value, that's resilient, sustainable, and recognised for its innovative international educational offerings for both domestic and international students.
He says there will be less reliance on work rights and residency to attract students and greater diversity in the countries that students are drawn from. He says it will take several years to rebuild enrolments, which used to total as much as 120,000 students a year. And he had this warning for schools.
One of the things that international families don't like is being viewed as a source of revenue for New Zealand schools. And I just would really encourage schools when they're talking about the importance of international students in the media to think about that, because we have had a lot of comment in the last 2 years about how our schools now cash strapped because we haven't got international students.
The minister had good news for primary schools. The government's dropped plans to stop them enrolling foreign students. Cameron Mitchell from Tauranga Intermediate says it's the right decision.
International students, there's a misconception that they are only for high decile schools. Coming from Tauranga Intermediate, we're a decile 5 school. We've had our international department going for 20 years. We've got 4 sister schools in different countries, so we wanted to maintain those really positive relationships, and this was very much put at jeopardy, so I'm pleased that common sense has prevailed.
Education providers have been doing it tough over the last couple of years, but so have their students. The International Student Manager for Mairangi Bay School, Frank Jar, says some children and their mothers have been stuck in New Zealand, unable to see the rest of their family since the pandemic began.
We have a student haven't seen their dad for 3 years. It's a lot of anxiety. We provide the best support, but it is also like a wife and husband separated for 3 years is not good at all.
He says there's a lot of uncertainty about how quickly enrolments will recover.
The feedback currently is uncertainty. China is in lockdown. South Korea economy is not that great as well. And if they come here, that means they may separate with the families for uncertain years.
Andrew King from Oropi School says his school is ready to welcome foreign students back.
We've been with our international students 2022, we had 1 or 2 in 2021, and we're ready to gear up and bring them back. We've got a really strong intercultural strategy at school. It'd be great to have international students along just to help bring that back to life as best as possible.
The Education Minister says he'll be travelling to the United States, Brazil and Chile over the next month to promote New Zealand as an education destination.
Youth-driven ram raids might seem rampant right now, but child welfare experts say locking up offending kids won't help. In the latest smash and grab, a dairy in Onehunga was hit by a stolen vehicle this morning. More than 5 ram raids a week were reported around the country last year, and 9 in 10 involved youths. Sam Ollie reports.
I hope not happen again, because I am a single father and my son living with me, 12-year-old. He was very scared this time.
The Waiho dairy and takeaway store in Waikato has been ram-raided twice in the past month. The first time, teens in a van smashed into the store and took cigarettes. Kids in a ute did the same last week, again taking smokes and a couple of ice creams. The dairy's currently shut, while owner Manish Kumar Patel pays thousands of dollars for repairs. His home is connected to the store.
We sleep and they suddenly bang. Then I see them from my room, from the window, dump at my shop.
Mr. Patel thinks police need to put more time into finding and punishing ram raiders and patrolling the streets outside dairies and convenience stores. But Māori Commissioner for Children, Glenys Philip Barbara, says cracking down isn't the answer. She says often the youth offenders have missed out on basic care growing up.
There are many of us in our communities who take for granted, absolute granted, the fact that we can go to the doctor whenever we need to, that we have a hot meal when we need it, that when we open the cupboard there's cayenne there, when mum's sick there's someone else to look after us, that there's always plenty of everything.
She's concerned about ram raiders ending up in youth detention.
If we put young people into prison-like environments, that then becomes their norm and the environment that they expect to grow into.
University of Auckland lecturer Dr Ian Hislop specialises in child protection, and he says ram raiding is often a form of thrill-seeking, escapism.
Peer group adventure thing that kids get involved with. They get carried away, you know. It's Saturday night, pinch your car and egging each other on to drive into a shop front.
But behavioural change requires good role models, people who stick to their word, long-term relationships and access to shelter, food and clothing. He says youth offenders deserve empathy, not a, quote, big stick reflex.
Relatively deprived and difficult kids living in neighbourhoods and setups that don't really support them having pro-social attitudes and stuff. That didn't turn up 3 months ago when we first started hearing about ram raids.
And despite what Dr Hislop calls ram raid moral panic, Ministry of Justice data shows youth offending dropped by more than 60% in the decade to June last year. On Monday, Cabinet will consider funding security solutions, like bollards, to protect small businesses from ram raids as part of this year's budget.
It's 14 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. An Al Jazeera journalist has been shot in the head and killed while covering an Israeli army raid in the occupied West Bank. Shireen Abu Akleh was a well-known Palestinian American. She and her producer were at a refugee camp near Jenin when the shooting happened. There is a global outrage and international calls for an independent investigation. The BBC's Tom Bateman reports.
I'm outside the headquarters of Al Jazeera in Ramallah, and this is a newsroom turned shrine. There are dozens of posters of Shireen Abu Akleh, and people are chanting for her. To them, she was a symbol of fearless journalism.
Her body arrived draped in a Palestinian flag, surrounded by grief-stricken colleagues. Ms. Abu Akleh was a veteran Palestinian journalist, one of the best-known women to become a regular face on TV screens covering the conflict over the years. Outside her parents' home, they chanted, "Shireen is beloved." Yasmin Ayad was a close family friend.
I grew up listening to her voice every day in my life. She always told the truth about my country. She never lied.
The 51-year-old was covering an Israeli raid into Jenin refugee camp when she was shot in the head. She was wearing a press flak jacket visibly marked. Another reporter who was wounded said the fire came from soldiers, but Israel claimed she may have been hit by Palestinian gunmen who it says unleashed indiscriminate fire at its troops. The Israeli army frequently launches arrest raids into the camp in the occupied West Bank. They have stepped up recently. It follows the region's most serious wave of violence in years. Armed attacks on the streets of Israel have killed at least 18 people, while at least 25 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. Ms. Abu Akleh had dual American citizenship. The US government called her death an affront to media freedom and called for an immediate and thorough investigation.
Australians will be casting their votes in just over a week, and if the opinion polls are to be believed, the Morrison government could be headed for a loss. There are many independent candidates, including the so-called teal independents, who are contesting some government-held seats. They are a loose grouping of individuals who don't belong to a political party but do share a common interest in wanting more action on climate change and political integrity. Anthony Green, the ABC's election analyst, explains the challenges facing Scott Morrison's government.
It only had a very small majority at the last election. And Scott Morrison has now been Prime Minister for 3 years, where last time he'd only been in office for about 8 months. So his leadership ratings are not as good as they were last time. Anthony Albanese, though he's not well known to the electorate, isn't actively disliked like Bill Shorten was, the Labor leader at the last election. So that balance over preferred Prime Minister has gone away from the government this time. And they're just wearing the wear and tear of another 3 years in government, of all the problems that arose during COVID, and of the financial difficulties, the budget problems the country has as a result of the last 2 years and a couple of years of changes in tax policy.
Yeah, what would you identify as the key issues for voters here? Because we're hearing a lot about inflation and the cost of living.
Look, inflation and cost of living are suddenly issues that haven't been around for a long time. The fact that the interest rates have gone up in the campaign, that inflation has sort of been ticking up for a while, and suddenly it sort of got worse and caused the Reserve Bank to move to lift interest rates at a time when house prices are already at record levels. A lot of people have bought properties in the last 2 or 3 years on very low interest rates and are suddenly going to have to start paying more. And, you know, the expectation is they will continue to rise for the next year or two. The government's we've got a structural deficit in the budget, which is not going to make it any easier, and is not going to keep interest rates low. And there's been static or declining real wages now for a number of years. And, you know, you've got a combination of declining real wages and inflation at the same time. It gets voters upset.
How would you characterise the difference between Scott Morrison's campaign and Anthony Albanese's?
Well, it's the opposition, where last time the opposition's policies became the issue. This time Labor has taken a much smaller target strategy. It's announced fewer policies which are different from the government. It certainly has not made itself the centre of attention in terms of the scare campaign that started against Labor last time. And one of the issues the government had is it's tried to run some of the same tactics, the same scare campaigns, but they find it very difficult to get any traction with the electorate and trying to scare them away from voting for Labor. And then there's also issues like climate change, which the current government has not done a lot on. It's not been its highest issue. And that's caused problems for the government. There's a series of inner city seats, traditionally very safe for the Liberal Party, where Liberal members are under threat of being defeated by independents campaigning on climate change.
Yeah, tell me about these teals, the so-called teal independents. Who are they, and are they a real threat?
Most of them, they are a real threat in a number of seats. Most of them are professional women of middling age who've had their own career outside of politics and are running for Parliament to try and get shifts from the government and from both sides of politics on climate change policy, and also integrity, that whether governments are being corrupted with redirecting expenditure to the key electorates, and rather than having a sort of a good policy of assessing all applications for funds on the same level, whether donations are influencing government policy. Those issues have become quite prominent in the last few years, and these candidates, these teal independents, are running against blue Liberals in these seats on greenish issues, which is why they've adopted the colour teal.
Is there a real possibility you could end up with a hung parliament?
It is possible. I think the longer the campaign's gone, the more it's appeared that Labor's lead in the opinion polls is real. And on that basis, it looks more likely, the most likely outcome at the moment, assuming the polls are right, and of course they were spectacularly wrong last time, but if the polls are right, Labor should get at least a small majority, and the independents won't get the balance of power. But if there's any drift back to the government in the next week, then a hung parliament is a possibility.
You mentioned the polls there. Is there real distrust in them?
Well, they were very wrong last time. Every opinion poll was out, and they were substantially out. It wasn't just a margin of error issue. Most of them have put a lot more effort into making sure they get samples correct. So I think there's a bit of a belief the polls might be more accurate this time.
Would you care to call the outcome?
A week and a bit out from the election, no, I wouldn't. But there will be a record early vote this time. The government is struggling to get traction against Labor. The coalition has been in government now for 9 years. There are accumulated dings and bangs that all governments get over that time. And you'd expect, and the Prime Minister's personal ratings are not as high as last time. Anthony Albanese is at least equal with him as preferred Prime Minister, which is, while it's not a good predictor of outcomes, but an opposition leader who can draw level with the Prime Minister is usually indicative of a party that's ahead in the polls, and that's certainly where Labor are at the moment.
And that's Anthony Green, the ABC's election analyst. Ukraine says its forces have recaptured villages from Russian troops near Kharkiv in the northeast, pushing them back towards the border. It could signal a shift in the war's momentum and jeopardise Russia's main advance further south. The BBC's Quentin Somerville has been with Ukrainian troops and has this report.
Back on the front lines of eastern Ukraine, the war is changing. It's become faster, more mobile.
This is first line. In the forest, enemy. You must very fast. In the hole. Hole, yeah.
That was a Russian shell just going overhead. And there it's landing.
Let's go.
About 5 miles north of Kharkiv, the Russians are being driven back in an ongoing offensive. Their guns now struggle to reach the city, but here the countryside is being hammered.
So I'm a little out of breath because we've just been running. You know, the striking thing about this war, even now in its third month, is the determination and the commitment of these men. All the men around me are from Kharkiv, so they're not just fighting for Ukraine, they're fighting for their city, the second largest in the country. And every house that they take, every other inch, every other mile of Ukrainian soil that they seize back, well, it gives their city, their hometown, respite from the Russian guns.
An army in retreat is still a danger. Here it's a game of hawk and mouse, so everywhere is driven at great speed. A Russian tank is still operating somewhere in this area, so the men head for cover.
They talk about their victory. These men say, if they can take back Kharkiv, the second biggest city in Ukraine, just by the Russian border, then why can't they take back all of their country?
But of course, the Russians aren't giving up either. That roaming Russian tank suddenly finds its target. The men in the bunker, an economist, a mechanic, a doctor, they barely flinch. And the shells keep coming. Half a dozen in the next 20 minutes, but no one is harmed. Here in Ruska Lisova and in Russian-speaking communities across Ukraine, Russia's aggression will not be easily forgiven nor forgotten.
Puerto Rico nearly had its electricity grid destroyed by 2 hurricanes and an earthquake in recent years. The US government has committed $10 billion to rebuilding it. For many in Puerto Rico, it's a golden opportunity for a move into renewables. The BBC's Samaria Hussein is there.
Nestled in the Caribbean Sea is the island of Puerto Rico. It gets several hours of direct sunlight a day, more than enough to meet all of its energy needs. But less than 3% of the island's power comes from renewable sources. Head into the mountains and stable access to power remains a luxury. People like Julia Rodriguez and Melvin Suarez just live without. They use their car battery to power the television at night. A kerosene lamp is lit. And when darkness comes, mundane chores become enormous tasks. Their movements may seem routine, but it belies their embarrassment at what their life has become. Sometimes we're ashamed to look for help, she says. We don't like asking so many people for help. It's embarrassing. 2 back-to-back hurricanes 5 years ago shattered the island's electricity grid, leading to the longest blackout in U.S. history. The same destructive elements can also be the solution. In another mountain town 100 kilometers away, Arturo Masol Deya is using the sun to bring power to the poorest communities.
We have been told for so long that Puerto Rico is a small island, that we don't have natural resources, that we cannot exercise the right for self-determination. And what we're saying is we have plenty of natural resources, clean energy sources that can be used to power Puerto Rico.
The island is largely powered by fossil fuels, oil and natural gas brought in on ships. By installing solar panels on the roofs of homes and businesses, Arturo has shown that solar is a viable option. Sure, they may be cost prohibitive for most, but the benefits are reliable access to electricity and energy independence. Case in point, this barbershop in town. 4 years since Casa Pueblo first installed solar panels here, and the people who run the place continue to be thankful. Thank God, says Orlando. I recommend everyone get solar power because it's the best. The bill was $50 or $60, but now it's $5. It's stupendous. Natural disasters, neglect, and mismanagement have left Puerto Ricans with a non-functional electrical grid. Last year, the transmission and distribution of electricity was privatized. Residents say it's become more expensive and the power cuts have become more frequent. Unsurprisingly, the company that has taken over says solar is not the answer.
We need all sources of energy, and that idea of a more decentralized grid with more renewable energy is part of the future here for sure. That doesn't get away from needing a solid, robust electric system.
The dire state of Puerto Rico's electricity supply is a drain on its people and its economy. But in some places on the island, it's actually enabled clean communal power to take over from fossil-fueled corporate interests. Now, what happens next will have enormous implications on Puerto Rico's economy and its environment.
And to some of your feedback now, in relation to international students, Helen says, I worked in tertiary education for more than 20 years and I can validate exactly what Chris Hipkins inferred. New Zealand institutions were seen as an easy way to get residency. The students would get a qualification aiming at sought-after jobs in healthcare and IT to get residency, then go on to work in other areas of interest or move to Australia. It's a well-known phenomenon. And this too, I'm sure many overseas students get good qualifications to take back to their own countries. In the past, some people have had studied for dubious qualifications, hardly worth the paper they've been written on, but they have been a path to residence. If you are just joining us, just an update on the situation with Simon Henry and his comments about Nadia Lim. The board of DGL has announced it's commissioned a thorough review of its culture following comments by its CEO about celebrity chef and businesswoman Nadia Lim last week. Chief Executive Simon Henry called Ms. Lim Eurasian fluff and claimed she was showing cleavage in the prospectus to help sell shares in My Food Bag. Now, the board has said that the comments were offensive and unacceptable. It says Mr. Henry has apologised, and that is by extension an apology to stakeholders, and the board acknowledges his genuine regret. Don't forget to tune in to First Up tomorrow morning, because the Milky Way's black hole have finally come to light. First Up, we'll have the latest from astronomers.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. A former Gloriavale resident says government agencies need to go into the place and do their jobs properly in assessing the use of unpaid child labour. The Community Arts Trust, trying to save Hamilton's Founders Theatre, says the fight isn't over yet. The council's decided the quake-affected building will be demolished. And a nationwide curfew imposed after violent unrest earlier this week in Sri Lanka has been temporarily lifted for a few hours. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Where are some of the biggest needs and the shortages? What sectors are really screaming out for workers?
Well, I think it's almost across the board, and I think that was what was good about the announcement today, because there is a lot of focus on highly skilled workers.
This announcement today, it made it sound like there'll be highly skilled workers coming here in their droves, but are we an attractive option?
Look, it's a really good question, Karen. We've seen some signs that the New Zealand employment brand's been a bit damaged.
Lately with Karen Hay, every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. After the news at 7, my forest correspondent. Now, I might have said forestry in the promo. Too many syllables on that word. Forest correspondent, because he's from Forest and Bird, Dean Banjit-Mercer, talking about the role that forests might be able to play, and actually a clarification of the role forests, both native and exotic, could play in getting this country out of its fossil fuel carbon hole. And then David Bremner, who's the conductor of the country's national band. He plays the trombone as well, and he plays the trombone for the NZSO, talking about a tour of the country by this country's national brass band. That's all coming up after the news at 7. Between now and 7, we'll have a report on the inner workings of the House from Johnny Blades. And first off, the detail. Now, there are estimates up to 50% of neurodiverse people are unemployed. What is neurodiversity? And could unforgiving work environments be keeping skilled people with skills that we could really do with right now, out of the workforce?
Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail.
It is so widespread. Every type of business is really crying out for workers.
Businesses everywhere are crying out for skilled staff. New Zealanders don't fit the bill and they're looking overseas and they can't get them in.
It's in retail, it's in hospitality, it's in construction, it's in trades, logistics, diesel mechanics, automotive mechanics, you name it. It's just really widespread.
Is there really no one to do the mahi, or are we just not looking in the right places?
Finding the right job can be hard, but it's much harder if your brain works differently. For neurodiverse people with conditions like ADHD, dyslexia and autism, their unemployment rate is around 8 times higher than the general population. That's despite research pointing to clear benefits of hiring them.
You have every right if I'm not the right person to be employed, but because of someone's issues, I mean, that's pretty, I mean, we're normal. We're normal, we just have, well, our brains is quite different. I mean, to say no just because of that reason, pretty upsetting.
That's from TVNZ's Sunday programme, following 3 young neurodiverse people for a year as they tried to find work. It was pretty heartbreaking. Brain injuries, Tourette's, or on the autism spectrum with conditions such as ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. School is hard, work is hard, life is hard. The unemployment rate for such people is estimated at between 35 and 50%, 8 times higher than the general population.
Why is the rate of unemployment for autistic people so high?
Possibly a bit of fear, possibly a bit of lack of understanding of what it means to employ an autistic person, possibly not thinking that they're geared well enough to possibly support that person.
And if you are neurodiverse and trying to hold down a job,
you start hiding all of your traits and you figure out how to fit in, but it's in all honesty, it's bloody exhausting.
Now there's something being done to get companies to recognise the value of people whose brains are wired differently and to support their neurodiverse staff. The Observatory Charitable Trust is launching a Neurodiversity in Business certification, or brain badge. It'll work a little like the green tick or rainbow tick, but there'll be less box ticking. It's backed by 3 big organisations, Auckland Transport, Kiwi Bank and the Warehouse Group. Business reporter Nikki Mando wrote about it for Newsroom.
Actually, everybody you talk to who you say you're doing the story, they say, oh, well, my niece or my son or my sister or brother or, there are so many people who are touched by neurodiversity, and particularly on this area of, not being able to find work or it being difficult for neurodiverse people to get jobs. Yeah,
so in spite of a fairly decent prevalence in the community, at least as many neurodiverse people as there are gay people, possibly twice as many, it's not something that has been addressed by companies.
I think you're, absolutely right. It's not, I think in the past they would have been considered perhaps eccentric. In a time pre-industrial revolution, maybe people did their own thing. It wasn't so fixed that you had to get up at this time and start work at this time and do exactly what everybody else did and then go home at this time. But you could perhaps have more flexibility in a workplace in a pre-industrialised era. But now, really, we're all expected to sort of more or less comply with how everybody else works, how everyone else goes to school, all those sorts of things. And I think it just doesn't suit some people.
The sort of articles that you've been doing over the years about this, what's been your take on where we're at with dealing with it?
I think we are nowhere. I think that there's, people say, oh, Silicon Valley, the tech companies, they're actively recruiting autistic people because they're so great at coding or they're so great at engineering. And that is, it's better than nothing, but it's still such a pigeonholing. There will be some neurodiverse people who are good coders, but your son and my son and many of the people I've interviewed are not great coders. They're not that sort of, you can't pigeonhole them into a coding box. It's a bit like saying, oh, well, we employ homosexual men because they're great in HR. It's just a lot of rubbish that you can sort of say, hey, we're doing our bit for diversity because we're employing autistic people in coding. And that's about as far as any company seem to go.
And do you think this brain badge idea will address that in some way?
It would be great if it did. I think the fact that the rainbow tick is quite well known now in corporates and a lot of people have adopted it. I think that's one positive, that if it can be adopted. I think another positive is that we're so short of workers. The skills shortage will be really good for this because if you can employ some figures say that 1/3 of autistic people are not in the workforce. So suddenly you've got a big pool of people that you could draw on if only you can be accommodating. Accommodation is the word that seems to be used a lot with neurodiversity in the workforce, is how can we make accommodation so that it works for both sides?
I feel a concept that's also often pushed when it comes to this is that these people have some kind of hidden superpower if we only let them unleash it. What happens to the people on the autism spectrum, for example, who just don't, who just find life difficult and chaotic and need structure in their lives to get the basics done? I mean, this is this brain badge thing going to account for those kind of people as well? Or are they all looking for some magic formula?
I don't know. I interviewed a brilliant guy a year or so ago, and he was on the autistic spectrum, and he was working with Autism New Zealand, and they put a mentor in with him, and he went to work as a cleaner in a retirement village. And he didn't have superpowers, but he just was a really loyal, honest. He was always going to turn up on time. He was always going to do the job that he was given. He wasn't going to leave and go and work for somebody else, but he was not good at change. And I think that's probably a lot of autistic people fall into that category. So if you're he was doing his cleaning and somebody said suddenly, oh, can you go to room 1 and clean that because there's been a spill? He couldn't do that. That was not what he was good at. He was good at doing the same cleaning every single day and doing it really well. And he worked with his mentor at the beginning of his job, and they sorted out problems. And he'll be a great employee because they've accommodated what works for him. Because if somebody did send him over to room 1 suddenly to clean it, he was not going to be able to complete that job. He was going to go into a panic, and that wasn't going to work. And that's about accommodating individual people and what they need to do a good job.
Are you able to gauge whether there's been more acceptance of people on the autism spectrum, or is it still very